When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I didn't cry. I didn't argue, and I didn't get angry. Instead, I just smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, not in the way you usually think of a smile. It was the kind of gentle, quiet smile that comes after a long, long period of sadness. It was the smile of absolute finality. I looked at my son, Robert, standing behind her. He didn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the floor, shifting his weight from one foot to the other like a boy caught stealing cookies. He was almost 40 years old, but in that moment, he looked like a frightened child again. The man I had raised, the one whose hand I had held through every fever and heartbreak, couldn't even bring himself to look at me. "Mom," my daughter-in-law, Sarah, had said, her voice tight and completely devoid of warmth. "We've talked about this. You've been here long enough. It's time for you to find your own place." She used the phrase "your own place" as if I had been camping in her living room, not living in the house my own husband and I had poured our life savings into, the one we had planned to be the family home forever. I simply nodded, keeping that quiet, strange smile on my face. It was the only thing I could offer in the face of such cold rejection. If I had cried, they might have felt powerful. If I had shouted, they might have felt justified. But my silence and that strange smile took all the argument out of the room. It just left the sound of a door closing, a door that was already closed in their hearts a long time ago. That single, devastating moment was the culmination of years of small misunderstandings, unspoken hurts, and the slow, quiet erosion of a family bond. I realized then that love, especially the love of a mother, can be rejected so thoroughly that it turns into a simple burden. And a burden, eventually, has to be set down. My name is Eleanor. I'm 72 years old, and I have lived a full, ordinary life. Nothing dramatic ever happened to me until the very end of my marriage, and then again when I was told to leave my home. Before that, it was a life of simple pleasures, Sunday dinners, gardening, and the beautiful, noisy chaos of raising a boy. My husband, Thomas, was a kind, steady man. He worked as an engineer, and I taught elementary school. We weren't wealthy, but we had enough. Enough love, enough laughter, and certainly enough hope for the future. Our son, Robert, was our whole world. He was a sweet boy, curious and gentle, with Thomas's serious brown eyes. When Thomas passed away 5 years ago, a piece of the world went with him. It was cancer, quick and brutal. The last thing he said to me was, "Take care of yourself, Ellie. And don't ever be afraid to lean on Robert." I promised him I wouldn't. I truly believed I never would be alone. After Thomas was gone, I sold our larger house. The cost of upkeep was too much for one person, and the silence in those empty rooms was deafening. Robert and Sarah suggested I move in with them. They lived in the house we had helped them buy, just a few towns over. It seemed like the natural thing to do. Sarah and I had always been friendly, and I adored my grandchildren, Leo and Chloe. I moved into their large spare bedroom. It was a beautiful room overlooking a small, quiet garden. At first, it felt like a retreat. I thought, this is how it should be. The generations together, helping each other. I offered to pay rent, but Robert waved it away. Mom, it's family, he insisted. Just help out with the kids sometimes. In those early months, it was genuinely lovely. I would make my famous buttermilk biscuits for breakfast. I'd sit with Leo, who was 10, and help him with his history homework. I'd read picture books to Chloe, who was 6, her small, warm body nestled close to mine. I felt useful. I felt like the grandmother I always dreamed of being. I felt like I still had a purpose in my son's life. But slowly, subtly, the atmosphere began to change. It started with small things, so small that it would sound petty to anyone else. It was the kind of quiet shift that only happens in the close quarters of a shared home. The first hint came about 3 months in. I had accidentally used a bottle of Sarah's imported olive oil, the expensive one, for a regular weeknight stir-fry. It was a mistake. I thought it was the everyday bottle. Sarah came into the kitchen and saw the bottle on the counter. She didn't say anything, but her face tightened. Later that evening, Robert came to my room. Mom, he started, his voice lowered, clearly uncomfortable. Sarah mentioned, about the olive oil. I apologized immediately. Oh, Robert, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it was the special one. I'll replace it tomorrow, absolutely. He looked away. It's not about replacing it, Mom. It's just, she really likes to keep her cooking supplies separate. She's got her own way of organizing the kitchen. His words hung in the air, her way, her kitchen. It was the first time I felt like a guest, an intruder, rather than a permanent fixture. It was a gentle reminder that this wasn't our home anymore. It was theirs. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. I understand, Robert. I'll stick to the pantry items. After that, I began to shrink my presence. I stopped making biscuits unless I was specifically asked. I ate my dinner later than them, or sometimes just a sandwich in my room, so I wouldn't disrupt their routine. I wanted so desperately not to be a burden that I started making myself invisible. The slow withdrawal of warmth became the new normal. The quiet tension started to build not because of big fights, but because of 1,000 small, insignificant failures on my part to fit into a life that wasn't designed for me. Sarah, a driven and meticulous woman, began to draw clear boundaries around my involvement with the grandchildren. She never said, "Don't help." Instead, she'd phrase it as protective concern. One afternoon, I was helping Chloe, who was 6, with a drawing project for school. It was messy, with glitter and paint everywhere, the kind of wonderful, chaotic fun a grandmother and a child should share. When Sarah came home, she stopped dead in the doorway. "Chloe, what is all this?" she asked, her voice sharp. Chloe, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, immediately crumpled, her lip trembling. "Grandma helped me." Sarah looked at me, a long, critical look that stripped all the joy from the moment. "Mom, I had specifically organized a time for this tomorrow. Now we have to clean this up before dinner. It's too much excitement right before bed." I felt a flush creep up my neck. I put down the glitter bottle. I just thought I would help get it done, Sarah. It was a lovely afternoon. I know you meant well, Mom, she said, using that tone that meant the exact opposite. But I need the routine to stay the same. It keeps the house calm. From that day on, I backed away from the children's activities. When they came to me, asking to play a game or read a book, I'd send them to their mother. Ask Mommy first, sweethearts, I'd whisper. It broke my heart, but I knew my time with them was conditional. The children felt it, too. They stopped rushing into my room after school. They learned to be quieter when I was around. A strange, unnatural politeness settled over them. It was the quiet of a house where one person knows they are slightly unwanted. My son, Robert, was caught right in the middle, and his handling of the situation was, perhaps, the most painful part. He didn't side with Sarah openly, but he didn't defend me, either. He chose avoidance. He started coming home later from work. He would spend his evenings glued to his laptop, immersed in work emails, creating a wall of digital noise between himself and the rest of us. One evening, I tried to talk to him, to reach through the fog. He was in the garage, tinkering with an old shelf. Robert, I began softly, leaning against the doorframe. Can we talk for a minute? Just about how things are here. He kept his back to me, tightening a bolt with a wrench. Sure, Mom. What is it? His voice was flat. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells, dear. I feel like everything I do, even with the children, is somehow wrong. Did I do something to upset Sarah? I truly want to make this work. He sighed, a heavy, exhausted sound that immediately made me feel guilty for bringing it up. He finally turned, but his eyes were weary, not loving. Mom, you didn't do anything wrong, he said, emphasizing the word. It's just that Sarah and I have our own way of running the house. We have our rules. You had yours when you raised me, and we have ours now. You just need to respect them. You need to remember that this isn't your house. This isn't your house. The words echoed in the small space, clean and sharp like a dropped piece of glass. He hadn't meant to be cruel, I knew. He meant to be practical. But it was the truth laid bare. I was not a co-owner, not a matriarch, but a tolerated guest. I simply said, I understand, Robert. I will try harder to fit in. I walked back to my room, and for the first time since Thomas died, I cried. Not because of Sarah's rigidity, but because of my son's weary withdrawal. The love was still there, I knew it, but it was buried under the immense pressure of his marriage and his daily life. He simply didn't have the emotional energy to fight for me. He had chosen peace over his mother's comfort. And that, for a mother, is the heaviest sorrow of all. The slow realization that your child is simply too busy, too stressed, or too compromised to be your shelter. The quiet tension continued to build. Sarah's mother, Carol, lost her job around this time. Robert and Sarah were stressed, managing a mortgage, school fees, and now supporting Carol occasionally. I knew they were under immense financial pressure. One afternoon, Sarah knocked on my door. "Mom," she said, businesslike. "We need to formalize the situation. We need you to contribute to the utilities and groceries. We figured about $700 a month would be fair." $700. It was a substantial amount, but I understood. This wasn't about math, it was about her increasing need for control and their increasing financial stress. I agreed immediately. "Yes, Sarah. That sounds perfectly fair. I can write you a check today." I started paying the $700 religiously on the first of every month. It meant I was dipping into my savings, but I was determined to be the easy boarder. But the money didn't buy me back into the family. It simply solidified my role as a boarder. The small, cold distance remained. The $700 felt less like a contribution and more like a toll, the price of staying in my own son's life. The emotional breaking point arrived on a cold Friday night in November, the night before Thanksgiving. It was caused by a simple act of love and an unfortunate accident. My granddaughter, Chloe, had been sick with a bad cold all week. Her breathing was wheezy, and she was miserable. Sarah had been frazzled, trying to balance work deadlines with caring for her. That evening, Chloe was restless and coughing constantly. Around 10 o'clock, I couldn't bear to hear her little distressed noises anymore. I knew Sarah and Robert had gone to bed early, exhausted. I quietly slipped out of my room and went to Chloe's bedroom door. I tapped lightly. "Chloe, sweetheart, is Grandma allowed to come in?" A muffled, small voice answered, "Yes, Grandma." I found her sitting up in bed, pale, clutching a stuffed animal. I sat beside her and gently started rubbing some eucalyptus balm on her chest. A simple remedy Thomas and I always used when Robert was little. It was just a comforting touch, a little warmth. I sang her the quiet, nonsensical lullaby I used to sing to Robert. Soon, her breathing calmed, and she drifted into a deep sleep, her small hand resting on my wrist. I stayed there for a long time, watching her sleep, feeling the deep, simple contentment of a grandmother caring for her own blood. The accident happened as I was leaving her room around midnight. I was walking out in the dark, trying to be as quiet as possible, when my foot caught on the edge of the hallway rug. I stumbled, and instinctively reached out to steady myself. My hand hit a small, antique wooden table, a delicate heirloom Sarah loved, knocking a heavy porcelain vase right off the top. The crash was shockingly loud in the silence of the sleeping house. The vase shattered into 100 pieces on the hardwood floor. In an instant, the lights snapped on. Sarah was standing in the doorway of her room, tying the belt of her robe, her face pale with shock, quickly replaced by pure, cold fury. Robert was right behind her, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Mom, what happened?" Robert asked, his voice strained. I stood over the mess, my own heart hammering. "Robert, Sarah, I am so sorry." I tripped. "I was just checking on Chloe, she was having trouble breathing." Sarah didn't even acknowledge my apology or my concern for Chloe. Her eyes were fixed on the wreckage on the floor. The vase, she whispered, her voice dangerously quiet. That vase was my grandmother's. It was the only thing I had left of her. Sarah, please, I pleaded, genuinely heartbroken. I'll replace it. I'll search for one, I promise. She cut me off, her voice rising now, losing its control. You can't replace it. You can't replace history. This is exactly why I told Robert we couldn't have you here. You disrupt everything. You don't respect our things, our space, or our rules. Robert just stood there, his face reflecting a painful mix of guilt and sheer exhaustion. He looked at the floor, then at the shattered porcelain, and then back at me. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I didn't mean to, Sarah, I insisted, the tears finally stinging my eyes. I was helping Chloe. You weren't helping, Sarah spat out, the fury now fully unleashed. You were creeping. You know I don't want the routine messed up. And look at this. Look what you've done to my home. She gestured wildly at the mess. She turned to Robert, her voice breaking. Robert, I cannot live like this anymore. I can't. You need to tell her. Today. She needs to go. Robert looked between us, his gaze desperate and defeated. His silence, in that moment, spoke volumes. It was the final, crushing affirmation that he wouldn't stand up for me. His silence was the loudest rejection I had ever heard. I looked at my son, saw the fear in his eyes, the absolute lack of courage, and I knew. This was the end. The vase was just a vessel, but it held all the broken pieces of our relationship. I didn't wait for Robert to speak. I looked directly at Sarah, and then I delivered the line I started this story with. I am so sorry about your vase, Sarah, I said, my voice steady, stripped bare of all emotion. But don't worry. I won't disrupt your home anymore. I turned, walked back to my room, and began to pack. Robert didn't follow me. He didn't say a word. He chose his silence, and in that silence, I chose my freedom. The next morning, when I walked into the kitchen, she delivered the final line, "It's time for you to find your own place." And I smiled. The quiet, devastating smile of a woman who had just accepted the deepest rejection of her life. I packed only what was essential. The few boxes I accumulated were filled mostly with memories, old photo albums, Thomas's favorite sweater, and a handful of meaningful letters. My departure needed to be clean, leaving no traces of my tenure as an unwanted guest. Robert helped me load the car. It was Saturday morning, barely 9 o'clock. The air was crisp and silent. Sarah was upstairs with the children, avoiding the whole situation. She never came down to say goodbye. Perhaps she couldn't face the quiet dignity of my leaving. Robert and I didn't talk much. The conversation we had needed to happen years ago, but now there was only a vast, empty space between us, too wide for words. Mom, he finally managed, his voice thick with unexpressed things, I found a nice apartment complex about 10 minutes from here. I put down a deposit for the first month. It's small, but it's new. You'll be comfortable. I knew he was trying to ease his conscience with practical arrangements. He was buying a solution instead of dealing with the relationship itself. Thank you, Robert, I said, genuinely grateful for the logistics, if not the sentiment. That's very thoughtful of you. He leaned against the trunk of the car, looking miserable. Mom. I'm so sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted. What we wanted. I reached out and placed my hand on his arm. His muscles were tense under my touch. Robert, look at me. He finally lifted his head, those serious brown eyes full of pain and shame. This was the moment I had dreaded, the one that broke my heart and simultaneously freed me. This is not your fault, I said firmly, but softly. And it's not Sarah's fault, not entirely. It just didn't work. We had two separate lives trying to fit into one small space, and we broke each other doing it. You had to choose your marriage, your immediate family. I understand that. I do. Please don't carry this guilt. He couldn't hold my gaze for long. He just nodded, swallowing hard. That's when I realized the full depth of his own sorrow. He hadn't been cruel, he had been weak. He had been paralyzed by the conflict between the woman he loved and the woman who gave him life. And sometimes, paralysis is the most damaging thing of all. I looked up toward the window of the house, knowing the children were watching. I didn't wave. I didn't want to make it any harder for them. The goodbye had to be simple. I need to go, Robert. I'll call you later, I said. I got into the car, a small, practical sedan I had bought with my savings. I looked in the rearview mirror as I drove away. He was still standing there by the curb, watching me leave, a solitary figure against the big, silent house. His eyes were full of shame when I drove away. That image, my son, paralyzed and ashamed, remains the clearest memory of that morning. It was the proof that the love was still there, just buried under too many layers of compromise. I didn't cry on the drive. I felt a strange lightness. It was the relief that comes after a long, intense fever breaks. The fever of trying too hard to be accepted, the fever of holding on to a dream that had already died. The new apartment was indeed small, a one-bedroom on the ground floor. It was clean and anonymous, a blank canvas. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I felt, for the first time in 5 years, true ownership. The first few weeks were quiet. Terribly quiet. The silence was absolute. Sometimes, the quiet was so vast, I would stand in the middle of the room just to hear the sound of my own breathing. I missed the children so badly it was a physical ache. But slowly, I started to build a life for myself. I hung my favorite painting of a summer landscape. I arranged my books. I started cooking meals I hadn't made in years, rich, slightly spicy dishes that Sarah had always disliked. I planted basil and tomatoes on the tiny balcony. I was rebuilding Eleanor, the woman who was a person in her own right, not just Robert's mother or Leo and Chloe's grandmother. Robert called me often. He would visit once a week, usually alone, on a Tuesday evening when he was supposedly working late. Those visits were sweet and healing. We didn't talk about Sarah or the vase. We just talked, two separate adults reconnecting without the pressure of a shared home. One day, he brought me a small, carefully wrapped gift. It was a beautiful, small ceramic bird. "It's not the vase, Mom," he said, looking down, "but it's beautiful. And it's yours. I thought it would look nice here." It was a small gesture, but it held the weight of his apology, the quiet acknowledgement that he knew he had hurt me. I didn't need to hear the words "I forgive you." I just needed to accept his fragile offering of renewed love. "It's lovely, Robert," I said, tears blurring my vision this time, tears of release, not sadness. "Thank you. I will cherish it." The grandchildren visited too, a month later. Sarah drove them over on a Sunday afternoon. She waited in the car while they came in. The visit was awkward at first, but soon, they were running around my small space, fascinated by the novelty of a place that was completely mine. As they left, Chloe hugged me tightly. "Grandma, your apartment smells like cookies and quiet," she whispered. I laughed, hugging her back. "I'll take that as a compliment, sweet pea." Sarah was still waiting in the car, but she did something unexpected. She rolled down the window. "Thank you for having them, Mom," she said, her voice softer than I had heard it in years. "They missed you." "They missed the cookies," I corrected lightly. She offered a small, tired smile. "Maybe. I'm sorry about everything, Eleanor. I really am." The admission of fault, the use of my given name, was enough. "I know, dear," I replied, meaning it fully. We all did the best we could with what we had. It was the closure I needed. Not a grand, theatrical reconciliation, but a quiet, realistic acceptance of our imperfect, broken family. We couldn't live together, but perhaps we could love each other better apart. Life, I realized, is a series of constant corrections. We spend so much energy trying to force people to fit into the shapes we design for them, the perfect son, the perfect daughter-in-law, the perfect grandmother. But people are not clay, they are living, changing rivers. And sometimes, you have to let the river find its own path. My departure was painful, yes. It was the loss of a certain dream, the dream of the classic, multi-generational household, filled with warmth and eternal belonging. But with that loss came a massive gain, independence. I started volunteering at the library. I joined a book club. I began taking painting classes. I started saving money again, not to pay a toll for acceptance, but to take a trip I've always dreamed of, a small tour of the gardens in England. My relationship with Robert is more honest now. We are mother and son again, without the heavy interference of domestic politics. We meet for lunch sometimes, just the two of us, and we laugh. He knows I am safe, and I know he is happy in his life, even if he still struggles to balance its pressures. The greatest lesson I learned that cold November night, when I stood over the shattered porcelain, was about the difference between home and housing. The house I left was just housing, a temporary structure I paid to occupy. My home is wherever my peace is. My home is in the memories of Thomas, in the joy of my new activities, and in the love I now share with my son and grandchildren, a love that is no longer suffocated by proximity. If you are listening to this, and you are facing a moment of rejection or immense change, remember my quiet smile. Don't fight the closing door. Don't waste your energy on anger or on forcing connections that have already been broken. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is to accept the end with grace. Let go of the need to be needed in the way you used to be. Find a new way to shine. Find your own true, quiet space, where your soul can finally breathe. I lost a house, but I found myself. And that, after all, is the best inheritance any woman can claim.